Okay. Okay, it's 4 o'clock. We'll call this April 16th, 2024 meeting of the Salina Planning Commission to order. Daisy, can you tell me if we have met the requirements of the Kansas Open Meetings Act?
Yes, I can confirm that the packet was posted and the required notice was provided.
Thank you. Dean, roll call.
Call roll. Commissioner Sideout. Commissioner Vancover.
Here.
I'll call roll here. Commissioner Sideout. Commissioner Vancover.
Here.
Commissioner Alt.
Here.
Commissioner Farber.
Here.
Commissioner Rogers.
Here.
Commissioner Paget.
Here.
Commissioner
Here.
And Chair Mike Sell.
Here.
So that gives us a quorum of members here, and we provided notice, advance notice of today's meeting. We also provided notice to the applicant, who I met with upstairs a few moments ago, and hopefully will be making their way down here. But we do have jurisdiction to move forward with today's agenda.
Okay. Very good. We'll get down to business. Approval of the minutes of the March 19th meeting.
I'd
Any
move they be
questions?
approved as printed.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the minutes as presented. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None being heard, motion carries. Dean, new business.
Under new business, we have a public hearing item for you, which is on conditional use permit 24-1, as filed by Galab Hamoud on behalf of VIP Smoke Shop. And that item was returned upon appeal by the City Commission to reconsider your February 2024 decision to deny VIP Smoke Shop's conditional use permit application. And so, before we get into the details of the specific application, we just wanted to go over the process, especially for some of our newer planning commissioners, that a conditional use permit is a subset of uses that are permitted in particular zoning districts throughout the city. And so each one of our zoning districts, whether it's residential or commercial, has a list of uses that are permitted by right, and you can move into a vacant building with that use with no separate approvals. And then there's a number of uses that are listed as conditional, and that's because they may have some specific attributes that make them unique or not fit in every particular situation. And so in those cases, if it's a conditional use, that has to be approved by the Planning Commission or the City Commission on a case-by-case, location-by-location basis. So an example of that is in our residential neighborhoods. You can build a single-family dwelling or sometimes a duplex by just getting a building permit. There's no hearings, there's no coming before any public body, but in that same residential neighborhood, if somebody wanted to buy a number of lots and construct a church, that would be considered a conditional use, and that church location and design would have to be approved by the Planning Commission following public notice and a public hearing. And so some of the advantages of this process is it gives the decision makers the opportunity to consider all the relevant factors that are important in deciding whether to approve or deny a particular use at a particular location. It also provides the ability to attach or approve special conditions that might make the use more compatible with its surroundings. It provides for a public hearing, which gives neighboring property owners, neighboring business owners, residents a chance to express their views and have them taken into consideration. The other thing about conditional use permits is they are revocable if conditions are violated or not met by the applicant. So we have, there's a unique situation in the state of Kansas, which is not often shared in other states, but the city issues liquor licenses to drinking establishments, but the city doesn't have the power to revoke them. Only Kansas Alcohol and Beverage Control can revoke a license, and many cities are frustrated by that because they have an establishment or something that is causing problems. They can't revoke that license. And so both the city of Lawrence and at the time the city of Salina were having some difficulties with downtown drinking establishments that were having negative impacts on neighbors. And so since nothing could be done with the liquor licenses, those types of uses were made conditional uses. And so even if you could not revoke the liquor license, you could revoke the conditional use permit, which would allow the establishment to be shut down. And so the revocable part is important when something is approved and it doesn't operate according to all the things that were presented at the hearing. And so these are repeated throughout the packet attachments, but our ordinance is pretty specific that when we review a conditional use permit and when we're writing a report, we try to provide information under all of these factors. And so when you evaluate an application, you're supposed to take these into account and make conclusions regarding all of them. And so we have a separate attachment that we attach to our reports, and we try to write our reports to address those individual factors. If you want to keep going, Dustin. So when we're first starting out, we have a meeting with the applicant. We determine that a conditional use permit is required, and we try to get as much information as we can from the applicant, get good attachments so we can share that information with the commission and with the neighbors. We make sure everything is complete, and we schedule that application for the Planning Commission's consideration. Once we have that, we determine the hearing date. We provide a public notice, which is now published on the city's website and not in the Salina Journal. And we send a letter out to neighboring property owners explaining the nature of the application, giving them the hearing date, and giving them contact information to phone or email staff or to attend the meeting. And so we hold the meeting, we determine if the applicant is present, we present the staff report, we have comments from the applicant by interested citizens, we have an opportunity for rebuttal, we close public comment, and then the Planning Commission deliberates and chooses what action they want to take. And so it's important, which you'll reemphasize, and with our new planning commissioners, we discussed that in our Planning Commission orientation, that in Kansas, a conditional use permit is considered to be quasi-judicial, and so you're acting more as sort of judges than for acting in a legislative capacity. And so these factors that are in the ordinance all come into play in evaluating that information and making a decision or recommendation. So once you have made a decision, there's a 14-day appeal or protest period. And so that can happen one of two ways. One, if you have an applicant who is dissatisfied with their decision made by the Planning Commission, they can appeal that to the City Commission. Or if you have neighboring property owners who are dissatisfied with the Planning Commission's decision, they can put together a protest petition, and if that's signed by at least 20% of the property within 200 feet of the request area, then that is considered a valid protest. And so most cases there is no appeal or protest, and so after that 14-day period, the conditional use permit is final and it's in place. But if there is an appeal, then staff will take that appeal to the city commission, and they'll put together a hearing date and ask staff to provide them all the information, testimony, minutes, including videos, so they can review that. And so they review the record of the meeting, and they can affirm your decision, or they can review the record and return the application for further consideration, together with a statement specifying the basis of their disagreement. And so they cannot overrule you or modify your decision on the first pass going to the city commission. And so it goes back to the planning commission, and you can either reaffirm your original decision with supporting findings or reasons, or you can reconsider what you did and approve or deny the application and submit a new recommendation to the commission. So upon the receipt of that decision, I think you'll have to scroll up, Dustin, because I can't see that. So once there's a second decision from the planning commission, then it goes back to the city commission, and they can make a final decision by a majority vote, unless there's a protest petition, in which case you'd have to have 4 of the 5 city commissioners take action to have a valid decision. So one thing that we wanted to make sure you are aware is available, and it is an exception, but there are situations where planning commission or city commission, when they're acting in a quasi-judicial capacity, they can go into a closed session with staff, or with, most cases, the city attorney, to try to work out conclusions and findings so that they can come back out into open session and better articulate their reasons in their motion and decision. And so you want to keep going, Dustin. And so the city attorney is helped provide this information, that anytime you're reviewing a conditional use permit, then you need to be looking at to see if there's evidence to support your findings. And the definition in Black's Law Dictionary is such evidence that a reasonable mind might accept as adequate to support a particular conclusion. So, and so you've got to distinguish between evidence that's been provided and just opinions that have been expressed during the meeting. And so the closed session, which we wouldn't want to use in every particular case, but it can be useful in the right circumstances for helping facilitate those deliberations. And so there have been cases such as the proposed demolition of the St. John's Hospital, where the city's Heritage Commission went into closed session with the city attorney. We've had some cases with some cell towers in the right-of-way where planning commissioners went into closed session to help develop findings and conclusions in support of decisions made there. So we just wanted to cover that ground for the new commissioners to explain what the process is and why this is back. And so I think commissioners would know that Omaha Tobacco Company, that the applicant represents, they have already entered into a lease to lease the former Family Video Store at 2018 South 9th, and they submitted a sign permit application to put up new signage on the site, and that caused us to contact the applicant and say that they would first need to obtain a conditional use permit before they could change the use of that space to a vape or tobacco shop. And their plan is to use it as a retail establishment for e-cigarettes and tobacco products, and as justification for approval of their request. They indicate that the site is currently in compliance with the city's C5 zoning requirements and that they intend to operate in accordance with the rules and regulations set forth by the state of Kansas on all CDB, tobacco, and vape products.
Dean, can I throw in one before you get started on the fact finding? It says in our packet that our role and responsibility in this is to look at this with fresh eyes. So I would ask commissioners to look at this with an open mind and a fresh perspective on this as we review the facts of this case.
Yeah, and I don't think that staff did a particularly good job the first time of helping commissioners understand when you're acting in a legislative capacity and when you're acting in a quasi-judicial capacity. And so when you're acting in a legislative capacity, opinions and assertions and those things are important because that's how policy gets formed. But in a case of quasi-judicial, you're looking at the existing ground rules that are in place and applying those to a particular location. And so at your February 20th meeting, the Planning Commission voted 3-2 to deny this conditional use permit application upon finding that granting this conditional use permit to operate an electronic cigarette establishment and tobacco shop would not contribute to the welfare of the public, and it would cause injury to the surrounding property. On the subsequent item, which was also a conditional use permit for the same type of establishment at 2629 Marketplace, that was approved by the Planning Commission by a vote of 4-1, and the applicant in this case, during those deliberations, claimed that the denial of his conditional use permit and approval of the subsequent one heard by the Planning Commission was unfair because both smoke shops would be selling the same products. Additionally, he pointed out that the other smoke shop had actually already begun selling products without approval while they had been paying for a lease but had not yet been allowed to open for business. And so their main contention is that if the basis of your denial of their application was that the products offered are unhealthy, they are equally unhealthy at both locations, yet the Marketplace location was approved. And so that's kind of the gist of their reason for their appeal. And so they timely filed an appeal, and it went to the City Commission, and they set March 25th as a hearing date to provide them with information about what had transpired at the Planning Commission meeting, and that included a complete transcript. So rather than having summary minutes, we had a complete transcript of the minutes from that meeting, and so that was provided to the City Commission. We've also provided it to you. At that meeting, following presentation of staff's report and comments from the applicant and comments and questions from commissioners and a recess into executive session for consultation with the city attorney, the City Commission returned to open session and voted 5-0 to return this application to you. And they expressed an expectation that the Planning Commission be deliberate in the application of standards for like applicants, that they would need to demonstrate that the denied applicant is sufficiently unique from similar applicants and what the impact was on adjacent properties. So I'm going to let Mr. Hers take over from there while I get some water to try to refresh my voice.
So as Chair Meisel pointed out, the role and responsibility of the Planning Commission in this case is to take a fresh look at this application as we re-review it and look at all the information and testimony that was and was not presented to the Planning Commission at the February 20th hearing date. And for example, there were several studies that were cited at the February 20th meeting about the potential harmful effects of vaping in vape shops. But if these studies served as part of the basis for the Commission's decision, they should have been provided to staff in advance so that they could be read and reviewed by all of the commissioners and decision makers prior to making their decision. So in their review, the City Commission referred to this application back for consideration because they felt that the Planning Commission did not adequately articulate the reasons that form the basis of their denial at this application when the vape shop on Marketplace and other locations along 9th Street were approved. And so in reviewing the conditional use permit application, the Planning Commission is acting in a quasi-judicial capacity, as Mr. Andrew noted, and meaning you're applying existing laws and regulations to a particular location and the characteristics of the proposed use. This requires that the Planning Commission make evidence-based findings as to the basis for their conclusions and decision. In arriving at its findings and ultimate conclusion, a quasi-judicial decision-making body must distinguish between substantial evidence and assertion or opinions that are expressed at the hearing, and it is staff's job to provide the Commission the information needed to make the findings and conclusions when we're dealing with a quasi-judicial matter. So in this case, Mr. Hammoud claimed that the denial of the proposed conditional use and the approval of subsequent conditional use by the Planning Commission was unfair, as Mr. Andrew noted, because they were similar uses and one was approved and one was denied. So for staff comments and analysis for this conditional use permit application, a conditional use permit application requires that the neighborhood notification and public hearing be conducted prior to approving the planning, being approved by the Planning Commission. And the Planning Commission must consider whether the proposed conditional use will comply with all applicable zoning ordinance requirements. In this case, the zoning requirements are those of the C5 Service Commercial Zoning District. And the property at 2018 South 9th Street was platted in 1969, and the building on the lot was constructed in the same year, and the footprint and lot configuration exists today as it did in 1969 without any changes. The existing lot and the building are in compliance with all of the lot size requirements, the bulk regulations, parking requirements, landscape regulations, use limitations, and performance standards that are required in the C5 Service Commercial District, meaning that the site as it exists today does comply with all of the C5 district regulations and requirements. The second criteria that the Planning Commission must consider is whether the conditional use in the location will contribute to the welfare or convenience of the public. In this case, the applicant states that approving an electronic cigarette establishment and tobacco shop would contribute to the welfare or convenience of the public because there is an identified demand for CBD, tobacco, and nicotine products in the community. Proponents of electronic cigarette industry argue that electronic cigarettes are a healthier, safer alternative to tobacco smoking. Therefore, if electronic cigarettes are a healthier alternative to tobacco smoking, this proposed electronic cigarette establishment could contribute to the welfare and convenience of the public by making this legal product available in a convenient retail location. Staff would note that discussions about the health benefits and health risks of vaping products is legislative in nature and not pertinent to the question as to whether this is a suitable location for retail shop. Staff would like to clarify that if the commission concludes that the proposed use in this location will not contribute to the health, welfare, and convenience of the public, they could still conclude that it would be a convenience at this location. Commissioners do not need to conclude that the use promotes both the public welfare and convenience in order to determine that this criteria has been met by this application. The third criteria that the Planning Commission must find is whether the use will not cause substantial injury to the value of other property in the neighborhood, and that it will not dominate the immediate neighborhood. Okay, so this.
I think I've regained my voice. So as we look at the impact on the neighborhood, they're stating that they'll operate this as a retail space. They think it will be a safe and secure environment. They will train all their staff members, check IDs, and verify that customers are of legal age. So one of the things we wanted to point out was that if there are concerns in a generalized way about vaping or vape products, those are really more legislative in nature and not location specific. If we look at the previously approved vape shop in Craft Manor, that location is 1,400 feet from South Middle School and 1,100 feet from the alternate school. This is 920 feet from the middle school and 1,500 feet from the alternative school. And so you would need to consider whether those distances are so significant that they would impact treating these two locations differently. And there have been some studies conducted in different states, but there's no empirical data or studies that we can offer you to show that the vape shops that have been approved to date in Salina have driven down or changed property values or occupancy rates in their settings. So, for example, Sunset Plaza is very concerned about filling their spaces and their values, and they have allowed a vape shop to open there. So it's still a bit of a matter of perception. And so if the concern is about spacing between shops or overconcentration, that would best be addressed legislatively through ordinance amendments and not through the conditional use permit review process. And so the question before you is really whether the proposed change in use from video store to vape shop would so change the character of the site that it wouldn't be compatible any longer with its surroundings. And then it would be up to you to articulate what the injury is to the surrounding property. One thing we want to point out that is relatively unique about this site is that it is buffered by right-of-way on two sides that's much wider than you would normally have in a neighborhood setting. So the right-of-way width for South 9th Street corridor there, the right-of-way itself is 200 feet wide from the west side to the east side. And so that is a fairly substantial buffer. And then on the Broadway side, the right-of-way width for Broadway is 120 feet and much wider as you get to the south. So this site is actually somewhat uniquely buffered from its surroundings or from any nearby residential by unusually large street right-of-ways. All of their parking requirements are met, and there's more than adequate utilities for their intended use of the building. So they're non-factors. They are not changing anything as far as access or driveways, and those have worked fine for commercial uses in this location. since it was first used as a restaurant, and this will be a much lower traffic volume use. And so, as we have noted, you are not under any obligation to change your decision from the February 20th meeting. Our job is to help you better articulate the reasons that justify any decision that you would make. But your first option would be to reaffirm your February 2024 action and deny the application if the required findings to approve cannot be made, or if you believe the proposed use would cause injury to surrounding properties if approved in this location. And you would have the option of going into closed session with the city attorney to help develop findings in support of that decision. The other option, you could reconsider that decision from February 20th and approve the conditional use permit application upon finding that the requirements in the ordinance have been satisfied. You could approve the application subject to specified conditions or ask that revisions be made to the plan for opening the shop. Or you could postpone consideration if additional information is needed from the applicant or staff to reach a decision. So whatever decision and findings you make, those will be formally communicated to the City Commission. So what we have done, in addition to providing some supporting material from the City Commission action, we have provided two sets of findings. One is findings of fact related to approval, and those are 2 pages found at the end of the packet, back to or front to back. And then we have provided a second set, possible findings of fact supporting denial. In those cases, we have ended those findings with the word because the City Commission and the City Attorney felt like those needed to be fleshed out to better articulate or explain the reasons to the City Commission for denying this particular application while approving one that was on the same agenda. And if it was due to health concerns about the products being offered for sale, that it's not really defensible if that's the basis for approving one and denying the other. So I think with that, we will pause and accept any questions that you have and discuss your alternatives. But again, you're under no obligation to change your minds. The City Commission asked that you take a fresh look at this, consider the concerns raised by the applicant, take into account those things that were expressed by the City Commission in their motion, and try to address those to the best of the Planning Commission's ability.
Thank you. Questions of staff regarding the facts that were presented?
I guess I'll just close with the 3 points that we kind of notes I took during the City Commission meeting were to think about is, one, what makes this application unique as to the conditional use review factors compared to other similar establishments that have been approved? Can you articulate that? How was your decision on this application consistent with the decision at 2629 Marketplace at the same meeting? And what was the basis for the finding of injury to surrounding property? And so I think those are 3 things to ponder as you deliberate.
Thank you.
We do have the applicant present. If you, once you have your questions of staff, the applicant's available to answer questions or to address the commission.
Thank you. Again, questions of staff?
I have a question about the application as far as just housekeeping and clarity, the address of the applicant. I see two different addresses and just want to be clear on what's the proper address for the applicant.
Mr. Hammoud's address, which was in the application, is in Omaha, Nebraska. And the property owner who owns this property is in Illinois.
Is there two different addresses for Mr. Hammoud on the application?
There's more than one, actually, because it's a big company that running 417 stores all over the United States. And we have different warehouses all over the United States. So basically, we have too many addresses all over.
So what's the headquarters address?
The
Or is that what?
headquarters is North Carolina, New Bern, North Carolina.
Could you, Mr. Hammoud, could you state for the record your name and address, please?
Yes, my name is Galab Hammoud. The address that I'm using right now for this application is get you on for a second. It's too many addresses, so.
And that was
beg
my-
your pardon.
My question, yes.
Yeah, just give me a second.
So there's two different addresses
One in
from
New Bern.
Omaha. One may be residential and one may be commercial, but we have 4891 F Street, Omaha,
That's-
Nebraska,
That's residential.
and we have 12112 48th Street, Omaha, Nebraska.
So one of them is for the warehouse, the same city, and one is the residential one.
Okay, and so what address would this,
The address for the business, for the main
or
quarter.
correspondence from the city to,
It's gonna be the 4891 F Street, Omaha, Nebraska.
and that's the address that the city would contact you for
That's
any
correct.
issues?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes. Most of our communication has been by email, not by mail. So
Okay. Certified letters go to what address?
that would go to the F Street address.
Okay. And you said you had many shops?
That's correct.
Okay. Any in Kansas?
There's a couple of them in Wichita and Kansas City. And there's one in McPherson about to be open.
Okay. And you leased this property prior to,
What's that, madam?
you leased it and then operated and then,
There's 3 in Kansas City that already operated. We have 4 in Wichita has already operated too. The one in McPherson about to be open within a month.
okay, and this one here, you operated and then applied for the,
We didn't operate.
No, they've never opened their
We
doors.
never opened it. We, the stand-up expenses already reached $255,000 because of the rent for over a year now, waiting for the approval from you guys, so we can start operating. We will not do anything illegal.
oh, no, I didn't think that. No. Okay.
Okay, can we go back to, do we have any questions of staff regarding this and the differentiation between the facts of this case in regards to the property versus what we think is in terms of health detriments and that type of thing? Okay. Mr. Hammoud, do you have anything else you'd like to talk to the commission about?
Actually, according to the property that complies to the all zoning regulation and laws, and also there's no any of the parties has any objection or concern. And about the health problem is the FDA already approved the manufacturer to produce this kind of product anyway. That's based on hundred of research. That's one thing. Second thing, there's already 11 stores in the city. 11 stores that has been approved. 4 of them in the same zoning, C5 zoning. The closest one only 2 minutes walking from the one that I'm planning to open. And I don't feel that's justice to deny mine. So whatever the decision came up from you guys, we will honor it and respect it, whatever it is. But, you know, hopefully that you will consider that in mind and help us out. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Hamud?
One thing we didn't include in your packet, but which you have up on the screen now, and it may need to be blown up some, but this is a map that shows the location of all the approved e-cigarette establishments in Salina. And essentially, they're somewhat in a linear pattern from north to south, mostly along or close to 9th Street, with 2 over on Broadway. And we believe the Cloud Cafe is still operating, but under a different name. And we would note that Willie's Vape Shop, though approved, has closed.
And this is a similar map that doesn't differentiate the different operators, but does have symbology that's a little easier to see. And you can see that a lot of them are on 9th Street or near 9th Street, and then also Crawford with 1 downtown.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
At this time, we'll take comments from the public.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Commissioners. My name is John Blanchard. I'm a citizen of Salina. I'm also a former city commissioner, and I'm a landscape architect and land planner. I've been in private practice.
Mr. Blanchard, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Your address, just for the record, please.
It's 250 South 9th Street.
Thank you.
I've been a professional planner and landscape architect for over 36 years. Practiced in over 14 states and over 24 municipal planning boards and city councils. I stand here today in support of this application, and I'll give you a couple strong reasons why. I appreciate the additional information that was given today by Dean Andrew, and that is you really need to understand that your primary goal here is to work within the legislation that has been established. That legislation was passed in 2014. I was a part of the governing body that passed that legislation. Prior to that, we didn't have anything. They came in, somebody came in, I think it was Juicy's, in with an application, and we had an option of either closing them down or have a moratorium and figure out a way to make these work. Because at the time, the science was such that nobody really had any clear reason to deny them. So I can tell you that I know some of you have the concern about health issues with this thing. Those have no bearing in the planning process. The legislation is what it is. If you want to, if there is a health concern and so on, and I can tell you personally, I contacted several doctors, and the one that was most helpful to me was Daniel Craig. At the time, he was a person that had worked to get people away from smoking cigarettes. He wasn't in favor of, so much in favor of e-cigarettes and so on, but he was a really good source of information. Having said that, the other information that I'd like to kind of help you with, because I watched the video from last time, there were 4 of you are here today. When I thought that the staff report was very prejudicial against the applicant, in that they mentioned, some of you will remember the term LULUs, locally undesired land uses, and they lumped the vaping stores in with liquor stores or adult bookstores and all those things, and that was completely unfair. Because with them, there are distance restrictions from schools and so on. There is no, in the legislation for these uses of vape shops, there is no language in the code that says it must be 500 feet from a particular use. If it was, then it'd be a slam dunk, no question, if it was within that. If it was outside of that, it would be a slam dunk. It's clearly outside of that. You have to act upon the law. So I would just encourage you, I really appreciated the clarifications from staff, and who knows, only those of you that voted would know that those clarifications may make a difference, but I would encourage you to kind of pass him through with Mr. Hammoud with the positive recommendation on this, because he's been waiting 2 or 3 months to get this into business. The other guy, his competition, operated for nearly a year, contrary to the law. And I'm not sure he was ever enforced upon or forced to shut down, but he operated without a conditional use permit, and he operated without a sign permit. So those are 2 things that are very important. One last thing I'd like to do is leave on a positive note here, and that is to say, if you do have a concern about maybe wanting to change this, you can offer those recommendations as this board to maybe change. If you don't like the conditional use or you want to add something to it, you can make that recommendation here at this board level and shoot it up to the city commission, where they would, of course, make the final legislative decisions. But you can do those things. And I'd like to just say, in watching the movie, the video from the last meeting, Commissioner Mike Sell and Commissioner Ault, I'd like to, your comments there about, why we're here and what we're looking at, I think you guys were spot on. And the only other thing that I would say, and I'll save it for the other comments, I do have another thought on process. But my main point is please let this gentleman open his business and get going. Thank you.
Thank you. Dustin, do we have anybody from the public online or on?
Yeah, all attendants for this meeting are actually in the room. We don't have anyone online right now.
Okay, thank you. Dean, this is kind of new territory for me, so do we deliberate? First of all, unless it comes to a legal matter or it comes to real estate acquiring, which is this board doesn't deal with, I am highly in favor of not going into executive session and discussing things in the public eye. Do we need to bring this back to the commission for discussion and action as we would if it was being seen for the first time, and then vote on it again?
Yeah, you would make sure that there's no further questions for either staff or the applicant or Mr. Blanchard. And if you are, have had all your questions that you have posed addressed, then you should close the public hearing and bring it back to the members of the commission to discuss and deliberate and try to work towards a decision. What we have done is, like I said, we've provided parallel findings. We've provided a set of 2 pages of findings that would support the approval, and we have provided partial findings of fact that would support denial that we think need to just be further articulated. If this was going to be harmful to the public welfare, articulating why, what the perceived injury is to the value of other property in the neighborhood because of some particular attribute, and then some indication of how this would dominate the immediate neighborhood or discourage development and use of neighboring property. And we've just tried to bring a few more facts forward, because the findings that relate to adequate utilities or drainage or access roads or parking or meeting the zoning requirements, there's no debate about those. The site conforms with those. The discussion would need to focus on welfare, convenience of the public, and injury to value of other property in the neighborhood or domination of the neighborhood. And so we have provided findings of fact, and so if there were a motion to approve the application with conditions or modified conditions, those findings that we have provided attached to the staff report could be cited in the motion. And if there's a motion to continue and resubmit the same recommendation to the planning or the city commission to deny, then we do think there would have to be some discussion and deliberation about fleshing out those characteristics that are harmful to the public welfare and the surrounding neighborhood.
Is everyone, has everyone had a chance to ask all the questions and termination of fact in regards to this application that they want to ask of staff or of Mr. Hammoud? So at this point, we'll close the public hearing.
Yes,
and
and
then
I would refer you back to the, we would be on page 11, I believe.
Page 10. Alternative actions.
Yes, your alternative actions are laid out for you, starting on page 10, carrying over to page 11. So you could reaffirm your February 20th decision and deny the application. The view of the city commission was that the basis and the findings in support of those conclusions needed to be more fleshed out than they were. You could reconsider your decision and approve the application, allow this to open and operate at 2018 South 9th as submitted in the application. You could approve it subject to specified conditions or revisions to the plan. We can't see any need for revisions to the plan since the building is fixed. There's ample parking. It's well situated. You could postpone consideration if you think information is lacking. What we try to convey, and I think Mr. Blanchard tried to convey that, was that by making this a conditional use, it allows you to put conditions on the use, and those conditions of how this business operates are designed to minimize any negative impacts it might have on surrounding businesses. So there are things that would apply here that would be implied to apply to other businesses but are very specific here. And number 7 is that the conditional use permit may be modified or revoked by the Planning Commission should it be determined that this facility or the conditions under which it was permitted are detrimental to the public health, welfare, or materially injurious to property improvements in the vicinity, or if its use is maintained to constitute a public nuisance. Obviously, no one wants that to occur. The applicant has been responsible in all their dealings with the city and have obtained all their state licenses, but those various conditions are just in there, as I described sometimes with drinking establishments, that if you have a bad actor, then the conditional use process allows a means by which that permit can be revoked. But that's really this, it's not, the conditional use permit process is not designed to keep the businesses out. It's designed to have the businesses operate in a responsible way.
Okay. Well, on that, I would entertain a motion to relook at this application. If someone is-
Relook at it? What does that mean?
Well, to look at our decision on this and how we formed that decision the first time, and to reconsider this application.
So we could be ready for a motion?
Well, hey,
So we
just
need a
once-
motion to bring it back for discussion, or is this just a discussion time?
Did you say we needed to close the public hearing first?
Yeah, you would close the hearing so that there's no further comments from us, and that you would deliberate amongst yourselves, and then someone can choose one of those four options
And I
for a
can do that
motion.
without a motion. I can just close.
Yeah,
the-
you don't need a motion to close. You're the chair, you can close the hearing.
So the public, or I mean, this hearing on this matter is closed, and any facts that we have found in addition to the first time, we have looked at with fresh eyes, and now we're going to bring it back to the board for discussion.
So are you ready for a motion?
Well, if there is no discussion on.
Oh, I still have the same discussion. I find it very hard to believe that when one of the criteria for a conditional use permit is, and it's in our packet there, the Planning Commission must consider whether the proposed conditional use will contribute to the welfare of the public. I find it hard to believe that we cannot consider the welfare of the public within this conditional use. I was the one who brought up the studies last time, and it seems like almost in this packet that was brought out this time, I was almost disparaged for bringing up that information and not sharing it with everybody else. But I assume as a member of the commission that you do your own research on every topic that we come in contact with. And so I brought back the same paperwork that I had before. There are studies from Johns Hopkins, there are studies from Mayo Clinic. There are all these different things that are talking about how this is not helpful to our community. In fact, I brought a flyer from our local schools. This is what they're putting up in our local schools, the local flyers telling kids, stay away from tobacco use, stay away from vaping. And I in no way see that this contributes to the welfare of the public. I have many other, and when this came up again, I brought more of it. It doesn't contribute to the welfare of the public. As far as the other issue, which was injury to the surrounding areas and the property values and so forth, I would cite a study. This is from Science Direct, and the conclusion of this study, and this is a quote, says current results are the first to empirically implicate tobacco shops as likely nuisance properties that associate with crime and violence. Any property that associates with crime and violence, and as a realtor, I'll tell you, it affects property values around them. We had that map up just a moment ago, and yes, there are right-of-way buffers on either side of this property, but crime within that area affects the property values, like the letter from the Bennetts that we received last time that was in our packet. It will affect those on the other side of Broadway as well, and I think it's almost ludicrous to think that this is going to contribute to the welfare of the public. That being said, this commission shot itself in the foot by denying one application, and then on the very next agenda item, we approve an application. How is that not perceived as discriminatory?
Back to your earlier comment about doing your own research. I did my own research this time, and I couldn't find any concrete data about property values. And I just couldn't find anything that said specifically, here is a direct correlation between these businesses and property values. I found a lot of supposition. I couldn't find anything factual. That's my own stuff, and you're 50% chance of what you're going to hit on the internet. But anyway, nonetheless, and while I agree with you from a health standpoint, I go back to what we're charged with, and that is looking at the suitability of this property for this application. So I appreciate your comments, though.
I understand. I'm pointing out that number 2 right there in our packet on page 7 says we must consider whether the proposed conditional use will contribute to the welfare or convenience of the public. And if it's a health, it not only does not contribute to the health of the neighborhood or to people within our community, so many studies even now are talking about how it is a detriment to the health of our area as well. So that's, and then we were told just a moment ago that we're not even supposed to consider that. We're supposed to look at it from a different perspective. It's, I mean, we're kind of caught in the middle because we've approved one and we've denied another with the same, and I'll make this statement as well. The other business that opened and operated without the conditional use permit, and we just said, all right, here's your conditional use permit, we have set a terrible precedent in this town, because now every person who wants to open a business is just going to go by that precedent and say, I'm going to open whatever I want, and I don't have to worry about getting a permit. I'll just worry about that later if I get caught. If I decide to put up a sign, then they'll come and tell me I've done something wrong. And that's a terrible precedent to set.
I think staff will probably tell you that's been going on probably as long as Dean has been here. Places open and they either don't know or don't care about the impact of that. That will probably continue to happen. But your comments are well, and again, on the health side of things, I agree with that. But I will reiterate that we are here to, look at this from the guidelines that we have given this application in terms of what we can do.
So is that guideline of welfare, or is that
I think
applicable?
welfare is a pretty broad
Sure,
description.
absolutely.
So
As is convenience there as well.
yeah, convenience and welfare, that's probably two tough words to describe.
Sure.
But you have my personal agreement on that, for whatever that's worth.
But on the other hand, to your point, exactly, one day is one thing, and other days, new evidence could come out. In this case, maybe not, but, just because the board has approved something earlier, later on, new evidence, new technology could develop that says, oh, we have a better understanding. And just because one errs and makes a mistake or has bad judgment doesn't mean we have to keep continuing that precedence or that road. So the buck could stop here, seeing the error of our ways or, new evidence and deciding accordingly.
And I appreciate what Mr. Blanchard said. 2014, this was kind of thrown on them. But a lot has changed in 10 years. A lot of information has come out. And I wonder if they had the same information we had today, would that board have made that decision the same 10 years ago? So 10 years from now, we may be asking the same question about ourselves.
Exactly, and when I did my research online, there was as many questions as there was answers in terms of health things. So anyway, I get it and I appreciate Mr. Blanchard's comments, and I guess that's probably why we have a comprehensive plan and we redo these things every 10 years, and which we got another one coming up, right, Dean? Is that?
Yeah, it'll be more than a review at that point.
Yeah. Anyway, further comments on this?
I would like to agree with pretty much everything Mr. Farber said. I don't see how this benefit the welfare of the public at all. I don't see how this helps Salina as a whole. I would say that the location for it would be another reason I would not support this. It's how many are just down in Craft Manor, how the school is so close to them. I understand that those other businesses opened when that school was there, but I don't think that going forward there should be so many if we just let Craft Manor fill with vape shops. I don't agree with that. I think that we need to, and maybe this is after the fact, but we need to come up with an ordinance that there needs to be a spacing between these vape shops or any other, I don't know, all the other things that were listed last time. But even if you just look at it on the map, it is surrounded by housing. There is businesses, Gambino's, and then I think that rest of that building is empty. And then further on, there's a strip mall, but it's surrounded by housing for the most part. And I don't see how putting this in the middle of all that is gonna be a benefit to those people in that area, a convenience, if you would say. So
I kind of differ with you a little bit in that viewpoint. In my opinion, Dustin, could you put a map up there, please, of the property? This is kind of out on a peninsula.
Right.
And the only reason that you'd have to go over there is to go to that business. Now, if you take Kraft Manor, for example, there's kids walking up and down there all the time. They're going to different businesses around there. So their chance of going by one of those other places and seeing that is probably, they're probably going to have more exposure at Kraft Manor than they are at this location, in my opinion.
I would say that there's more traffic driven through this location and school kids walking home from school than there would be
Yeah,
school kids walking in Kraft Manor.
I can tell you from a bicyclist standpoint, that's a hard place to get to right there. There's a light right there and a crosswalk and a little way to get through that.
Just because you're not going to it doesn't mean you can't see it and are subjected to it.
I agree.
And why do we compare it with the Kraft Manor? What value does that bring to the decision?
I guess what I was rebutting the commissioner's point on of where it was located and its ability to have people or kids in specific look at it. But let's get also back to the gist of this matter. Kids are not allowed in the establishment, period. And so, Mr. Hammoud, I'm going to go back to you for just a second. What do you guys do to keep kids out of there?
According to my experience, we have too many stores, and we know what's the difference between conditional permit and tobacco and vape permit. Tobacco and vape permit gets you 12 mistakes to dismiss your license, okay? Conditional permit, if you make one mistake, you can revoke the application. You can take it and shut it down. So we are scared and aware of that more than anybody else. That's $1 million business. I will not sacrifice $1 million over $5 product. So that's one thing. Second thing, we have a system, POS system, that connected to the warehouse that controlling when and watching by other employees over there that 16 hours work every day watching. Everything has to be scanned by ID. You can check our other stores, search them online and see. VIB smoke shops, tobacco and vape smoke shops, and Midwest smoke shops. All of them, all around United States, you'll see the same system. So impossible that will sacrifice this kind of money over something it doesn't worth it. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question, though. Do you, concerning the welfare, do you give back to the community that you service?
What do you mean exactly?
Do you give community hours back to the communities you service, or money, or
I don't get it exactly.
volunteer?
Yes, for sure, we pay taxes.
No, that's not what that's not,
So helping the community,
yeah, helping the community that you
we
serve.
don't have no issue to helping the community.
But can you give me examples that you've
Like,
done in
for
the other
example, we do
stores?
charity sometimes for the churches,
Like what type of charity?
cash charity and money charity for the community,
Okay.
for the cancer hospitals sometimes. There's too many charities that goes, I can give you proof if you want requiring this kind of documents.
Okay, thank you.
I know that this was brought up just a moment ago, but oversaturation, I think, could be another issue as well. Mr. Hammoud mentioned 11 stores, and I think we had that mapped out up there a moment ago, 4 in this particular zone. And to the comments a moment ago, children are being affected. The CDC itself says since 2019, there's been a 1,000% increase in e-cigarette use among high school students. 1,000% and 400% among middle school students. And so young people are being affected. This is within vicinity of a middle school over there as well. And I stick with where I was before, and I would urge this. We're between a rock and a hard place because, well, for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, the flip-flop on the votes really got us in a bind up here last time.
Commissioner, I would like to make a few comments. The comments made at the other end of the table, I totally agree with their philosophy on it. But we've got a businessman here that wants to open up a business. We've got 11 other ones in town. You mentioned we shot ourselves in the foot. We did. And in order to, we're back here based on the city commission wanting us to look at it again with no objections of why not to look at it. But I don't know how we can deny the applicant based on other vape shops being in town. You know, if we want to shut him down, we need to shut everybody down. We don't have the power to do that. Unfortunately, we're kind of stuck where we are to make a decision based on the facts that are in front of us, that he's met all the requirements. I don't see how we can deny him.
So are our hands tied from this point on? Every time we have this type of business, we don't have a choice?
Well, if you have 11 other ones that have established the criteria and you have a 12th one that wants to come up and he's met that, I don't know how we can deny him.
And also, staff had pointed out the difference between the legislative side of this board and the quasi-judicial. So
We crossed the line there a little bit, I think. Yeah.
we did. So if in fact that's something that we want to look at, we would have to introduce that
Right.
through a different tool.
So we were, but you mentioned, I was just wondering the process. It's mentioned here by the comment, so that's why I brought that up.
Wouldn't that be done by an ordinance, Dean?
Well, the comment that staff made and that Mr. Blanchard made in his experience as a commissioner having to wear both hats is that when you're talking about opinions about the desirability or undesirability or harmfulness of a particular use, and therefore it needs to be regulated more strictly, you're talking about a legislative capacity. And you're saying we need stricter rules, we need separation requirements, we need this. When you're doing that, you're acting in a legislative capacity, discussing potential changes to the ordinances that exist today. But what staff and Mr. Blanchard were trying to point out was that there was a framework established for reviewing those in 2014. We've used that same framework for all 10 applications that have come before this board, and we will continue using that framework unless there's a change made to the ordinance and someone says, I think no vape shop should be allowed to locate within X feet of a school. You can propose that as a planning commissioner as a change to the ordinance, but you can't make that as a rule to an existing framework that we have, because we don't have such a rule. There's a state law that says you can't locate a retail liquor store within 200 feet of a school. There is not a state law that says you can't locate a vape shop within 200 feet of a school. You would be making up a new rule. And so if you want to make up new rules, you do that in your legislative capacity, and in your quasi-judicial capacity, you're applying the existing rules that we have to the applications that come before you. That's the best way staff can explain the difference between legislating and being in a quasi-judicial role.
This is a very hard decision, and we're not getting paid enough for this.
Are you
we get
suggesting a pay raise?
Yeah.
So, well, let's get back to the business at hand. Any further discussion, first of all, among the commissioners? Okay. I guess at that point, I would entertain an action to either reaffirm the denial or to propose that we have a revote on it, and also with the findings of facts. Why?
I would move that we do alternative action number 2, which is to approve the conditional use permit, in this case, with the 8 conditions that the staff have outlined.
And your conditions of finding of fact, would those be supported by the
Correct.
Facts related to approval that were in the packet?
Right.
Is there a second?
I second that.
Have a motion and a second to approve application CU 24-1 with the staff recommendation of 8 conditions. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
So can we get a,
I'd like a roll call vote, please, on that.
thank you, Marty.
So we have a motion on the floor to approve the application subject to conditions based on the findings attached to the staff report. And on that motion, we'll see Mr. Van Covern,
Aye.
Mr. Alt,
Aye.
Mr. Mike Sell,
Aye.
Ms. Waters,
Aye.
Ms. Paget,
Nay.
Mr. Rogers.
Nay.
Nay. I'm sorry. Jumped the gun there.
Okay.
Nay.
So I read that as a motion that passed by a 4-3 vote.
Very good.
That will be communicated to the city commission.
Okay. Unfinished business, Dean.
Don't have any unfinished business that carries over from previous meetings, except for this item. I would, in terms of, we have no administrative or preliminary discussion items, and in terms of other business, we do plan to have a meeting the first weekend, or first Tuesday in May, and then there will be most likely a meeting that second weekend in May. I believe that it was announced when the special use permit was approved for the downtown farm and art market that their opening weekend will be Saturday, May 18th, if you want to mark that down. Just in terms of finishing off our discussion there, we'll continue to try to do a better job in our reports in terms of legislative versus quasi-judicial role. But one of the reasons that we have the preliminary discussion item slot on the agenda is if there is a legislative matter, whether it's vaping, smoking, landscaping, signage, topics like that, and say, I want staff to provide some background of why the rules are the way they are and what their origins are, so we can discuss making possible changes. That preliminary discussion item slot is for commission, to allow the commission to try to ask staff to look at something, to initiate something, to initiate a change. So under state law, either the city commission, in most cases the planning commission, and in some cases an affected business or property owner can file or initiate an application to change a zoning rule. And so it has to be one of those three parties. In most cases, it is the planning commission, after discussion with staff, that initiates that change. And so when we had Juicy's Vape Shop open, no one on staff and most people in our commissions had any idea what a vape shop was or what vaping was. And so the city commission said, we're going to adopt a moratorium. No more vape shops till we get educated on what they are and what it means to the community and how we want to approach that. So there was a moratorium on new vape shops until staff had done research and provided education to the Planning Commission and City Commission about what vaping was, how it compared to smoking, what was known, what was unknown, and how those things could be regulated, which is how we ended up with the conditional use permit review framework. But all those things are open for tweaking or discussion or any of those things, but the preliminary discussion item on the agenda is a good time to bring those up. The other thing I want to make is it goes back to the inclusion of studies. It is all well and good, and we encourage all of our planning commissioners to read, look at studies, become educated about a topic. But when you bring a study in to the decision-making or basis of a decision-making, and you don't provide that to staff and say, I've been reading up on this or that impact of these types of establishments on property values, and I have this study right. If you don't provide that to staff, and staff can put it in the packet, the applicant has no idea that that study is being used as a basis or a possible basis for a decision. So if it's included in the packet that says planning commissioner thought this was informative and should be shared with all commissioners, the applicant can see it and they have a chance to rebut it or have a chance to say, well, I've got this study that was done that rebuts that. But if they don't know, they don't have an opportunity. They don't know what studies people have read or not read. So our advice when we're acting in this kind of capacity is if you have a study that you think is helpful or informative, provide it to staff. We'll put it in the packet, and everybody has the same information, and the applicant can say, yeah, I understand that, but I've got research from this group that contradicts that. But they can't do that if it's not shared in advance.
Dean, I think we talked about last time about looking at this and possibly in a joint session with the city commission. This is obviously not a hot topic, but it's a area of concern, and maybe to get a little more definition on like locations and density and maybe let's look at something like a distance from schools. Something more finite than what we've got right now.
Yeah, it's one of the things, I mean, we had it in our distant background report, but in 2014, one of the options that the Planning Commission and City Commission had was to adopt an ordinance with separation requirements, and at the time, those bodies chose not to impose a separation requirement and to use the conditional use permit process as the review mechanism. So oftentimes when there's legislation that's being proposed, there might be 4 or 5 different variations or options, and then the commissions choose one at that time. And sometimes they want to go back and change their mind later. But our job as a staff is to try to provide as many options as we can for legislating, and if there's topics that you want to delve into further, the time to do that is either a preliminary discussion item or a separate study session, and it's really, really hard to do that when you have an application in front of you.
Yep. Well,
It's better to have that discussion when you don't have an application in front of you.
Would the rest of the commissioners support looking at this in a study session, possibly joint with the city commission?
Yes.
I would, yes. I
Yes.
almost feel like the city seems to be more reactive than proactive. I think we need to get in front of some of these other things that are coming at some point. Like what if they approved actual marijuana or whatever to be used, and you can't just tomorrow. We don't have anything in place that would say that these businesses would just come in and start opening. We'd be in the same position that we are in right now, where we don't have any rules or ordinances in place. And I think that we need to look ahead, as well as looking on things like that.
I think that'd be a great joint topic.
Well, that's something that we can suggest when we take this back to the City Commission, that's something this body would like to have some dialogue with them on.
Very good.
Would we hear back from that at all, as far as if they decided they didn't want to do any dialogue, that we could still come up with some sort of ordinances so that we're not in the same position that we are now?
Yeah, you don't have to have that dialogue to, as said, as a planning commission body, if there's a majority of you that want to initiate a change to a zoning code provision, that can be done by a motion, a majority action by this body. So if you want to, last year we did a number of changes to the zoning ordinance to be more accommodating of residential daycare, because that was daycare shortage, and we just did an examination of all of our rules to see if we were being an impediment to providing daycare. And so that was something that we looked at, and so it can change. The topic of interest can change from time to time. So if there's a topic of concern and a majority doesn't mean the city commission's always going to agree with what you initiate, but you have, as a planning commission, the right to initiate it.
Well, and that's another good reason for pursuing a joint meeting with them, that we are on the same page before we, I mean, it doesn't do any good for us to talk about it if it's not going to happen on their end, so. And also get more viewpoint, what they think.
More input.
Yep.
Sure.
Yep. Okay, public forum. Mr. Blanchard.
Take it quick,
Okay.
please.
Thank you.
First of all, name and address, same. Thank you guys for your vote and your thoughtful consideration. It was good to hear good deliberation. 4-3 carried the day, but doesn't mean the three opinions weren't valid or well thought out. One of the things that I would like to maybe see happen, and I brought up Commissioner Van Coveren. You had mentioned at that meeting, hey, can we, when you were on the second vape shop, you made a comment about, well, can we reconsider this thing? You asked about Robert's Rules. And there is a tool at your disposal. It's called a motion to reconsider. Anybody that had voted in favor of that, which you were one of them, could have said, I would, and the way you do it is you say, I would like a motion to reconsider, okay? As the motion maker, you have to be in the affirmative. Any of the five of you could have seconded that, and then you vote on it. And then what you would have done is you would have gone back to the decision to deny. You would have put that back on the table at the point right before you voted. And then you would have said, hey, this is, we have more information now. Would anyone want to reconsider? And so, it might have avoided what Commissioner Farber had said about being inconsistent in the voting on that thing. So that was available to you. And the second thing, and these are just board things that most of you will learn as you spend more time on the board, and that is that the original motion that was made to deny, it had essentially died for a lack of a second. And I believe, just piecing it together, Commissioner Alt, when you second that, I kind of got the impression that you were seconding it, not knowing that if it died, you could have then made the motion to approve, that you were only dealing with one option. But if a motion dies, either by vote or by lack of a second, then if it was a motion to accept or deny, you just can't leave an action unacted upon, or else it dies. So, anyways, I appreciate you guys for all the work you do. Just one last thing. Every meeting you talk about people to fill out expression of interest. I've had one filled out for almost 3 years. That's not your that's not your decision. But I'd much rather be up there helping you guys than having to come in here with limited time to help you. But thank you for your service.
And I'll bring that up again. Fill out those expression of interest forms. You never know when they're going to need to be on a board. And I want to just piggyback on Mr. Blanchard's thought. This is what boards are about, is split decisions and open discussions and the appeal process, and this is how America works. And I I'm tickled when things are not cookie cutter, 7-0 or whatever we are now. I like when stuff gets discussed and discussed rationally, and I like to be on board with the decision then when it's done by the board, and I think we do a good job at that here, and we do discuss things thoroughly. So, anyway, thank you all. I'd take a motion to
Good luck to you, Mr.
adjourn.
Mahood.
Oh, I'm
Good luck.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn?
In a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Margie doesn't need a roll count? Okay.